For years, my only connection to the trans community was online. And it's actually kind of weird to say trans community now that I have real-life friends who are asking me to help move and to pet sit, and there's drama about who slept with who, and, you know, that's the stuff that, like, really makes a community, and this was just a bunch of people who posted in the same subreddits. But, like, either way, that was my connection to transness. My idea about what life could be as a trans person when I was early in my transition was just, you know, watching people online talk about it. And so, my channel is rather explicitly targeted at that kind of person. I have a lot of nostalgia for that younger version of myself, and I like making videos that I think he would have really liked and appreciated. And that's the sort of unpolished, non-influencer, just ramblings about my life and talking about the doubts and the anxieties that I had going into transition, about the, you know, emotions that I have now living life as a sort of normal trans person. So one of my long-term subscribers left this really lovely comment on a video a few videos ago where he was like, I've really loved watching your videos over the years, and I'm just hopping back on here randomly because I've actually found I've kind of outgrown them, and I haven't been watching them recently because now I'm done with my transition and living life as a trans person. And I thought that was super special. I would be thrilled if he was watching this video, but I would also be thrilled if he isn't, because I think it put to words an actual goal that I have with this channel, which is that I hope you will outgrow it. And I hope that at some point you will be kind of bored by my videos because you will be living your real life as a happy, content trans person, and not need to hear from me about what it could be like, because you'll be doing it. And recently, I've been, you know, getting... I've been getting a lot of comments that have been super transphobic, and I don't really know what happened. I think that maybe my channel got posted on some sort of transphobic site or something, I don't know. And they don't bother me at all. I have talked about this before, but I don't really care when I receive transphobic comments because I'm just content and happy in my life and it doesn't bother me. But I think it brought up this thought process for me, which is that I am pretty thoughtful about my position as a content creator who engages on the internet, right? I want to make content that helps you get into the real world, as I was saying. And I notice a lot of trans content creators that spend a lot of time engaging with transphobia really, really directly. This sort of alarmist content gets a lot of clicks, right? These algorithms want us to engage in these terrible doom spirals because strong emotions keep us coming back to things, right? And so if you're horrified, you're going to spend more time on TikTok, you're going to spend more time on YouTube, and so you get recommended horrifying content. Even when these videos are talking about how, oh, you know, these transphobes are dumb, these transphobic ideas are bad, I think it can cultivate this idea that the transphobia that people experience on the internet is the exact same as the transphobia that you will experience in real life when you have transitioned. And that is just not true at all. And so I have made videos that have engaged with transphobia and that have, you know, tried to argue about ideas. And I like to think that, you know, well, I know that the reason why I've made those videos is because I think that those, you know, those themes do come up. And it is important to know and have awareness about why, you know, transphobic ideas are wrong, because we'll have discussions with people in our real lives about that. But the way that people hold opinions that are transphobic and the way that people express them is so different in real life compared to what you'd see in a YouTube comment section. And so I intentionally don't really particularly moderate the comment section. If someone is attacking people in the comments, then I will remove them, like they're harassing actual people. But if they're just saying mean stuff about me, I don't care, I leave it up. I actually had a comment where someone was like, I bet he's removing all the hate comments. I'm like, no, I don't actually, mostly I just leave them up. I'm fine with that choice because, again, I think that is a feature of the internet, right, is people say a lot of stuff. But I want to be incredibly clear about how the internet differs from the real world, you know, given that I'm spending my time with you guys on the internet. And so that's what this video is going to be about. Transphobia online is extreme, but entirely unimpactful. Transphobia in real life is often mild, but can have very serious consequences. And so right now, I am pretty quiet about my transness. I am masculine, I pass, I'm a trans man, and I live in a liberal area. So things are about as good as it could get, right? But I've also been a non-passing trans person in a rural area. And so I'm speaking from that whole set of experiences I've had of my whole life as a trans person, which wasn't always like this. And again, you might not have my experience. You might not have my experience because maybe you're not the same as me. But also, even if you are the same as me in many facets, you know, we get different draws. Some of us get lucky, some of us get unlucky. And many of the instances I've had where I've experienced scary transphobia have been just like around the wrong people at the wrong time of day, and you end up in a bad situation. And so I'm not trying to claim that life is rosy and amazing as a trans person always. But I don't think I would have realized, based on the exposure I had to transness when I was a younger person, how much of transphobia is quite mild. And mild transphobia can end up having big consequences for trans people because it impacts how people talk about transness, how people perceive trans people, what laws get passed. And those are things that I think about and that are scary. But it does mean that the direct interactions you have as a trans person, that sort of person-to-person engagement, is something that's manageable. And that's not how people interact on the internet, right? The kinds of people that are writing long tirades about trans people, that are watching 30-minute videos about trans people and writing really crazy stuff about me, those are not normal transphobic people. Normal transphobic people hold views about transness very passively and very mildly. And so something that I was reminded of when I've been thinking about all this is, I think, a very common sentiment that gets floated around the internet, especially in sort of leftist spaces, is this kind of tweet. So I found this one tweet, but like, you know, this genre of tweet. It says, quote, "Not everyone supports the LGBTQ community and we need to respect their opinion." And then the person says about that quote, "An opinion is whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza. When we invalidate someone's gender, mistreat same-sex couples, or fight against inclusive policies, that's oppression. Big difference." And so online, on Twitter, and, you know, Reddit, and sort of internet places, there's this idea that bad opinions, or aren't opinions, oppressive ideas about people always need to be fought and always need to be engaged with. And do I respect transphobic opinions? Well, I don't know what, like, respecting them means. In practice, it's actually pretty easy to just kind of let them be. And most of your real life outside of the internet as a trans person is going to be letting things be. The world is pretty messed up, and there are lots of people that don't get transness. And we just kind of have to exist and live with that. We have to live with our differences. And we have to pick and choose our battles. And that's actually great, that most people do not want to be in a constant battle with us about our transness. Most people just want to let us live our lives, they don't get it, whatever. And I think this was surprising to me as I went about my transition, because early on in your transition, or when you're questioning transition, your exposure to transphobia or people who don't get transness is like YouTube comment sections and horrible videos made by transphobic people and, you know, people who are really close to you, friends, family, loved ones, the first people you come out to, who feel compelled to tell you their opinions on the matter, right? So all the time I'll see people talking about hurtful things their mom said, or hurtful things that their significant other said. The reason those people can hurt you is because they're close to you and because they feel like they can share whatever opinion they want about what you're doing with your life. I think it's a common thread among trans people and cis people alike that our parents hurt us by making judgmental comments about our life choices. And luckily, most people in our lives don't feel compelled to offer their opinions quite like our parents and our loved ones do. And so, you know, early on we assume that everyone's going to be coming at us with this sort of heated hate because we're exposed to a set of people that feel most able to do that. But luckily, most transphobia is really passively held by people. I am confident that many people in my life are transphobic. And I'm not even talking about, like, the standard that, you know, queer spaces hold of transphobia, where you have to, like, say every word correctly, and where even I have been accused many times, actually, of being transphobic by, like, people in the comments and whatever. The word transphobic gets thrown out a lot in queer spaces. No, I'm talking about, like, a much more base level of transphobia, which is, like, do you think that being a man or a woman is 100% determined by the sex you're assigned at birth, or is it possible for people to, like, transition? Is it possible for me to be a man? That's what I'm talking about by transphobia. Just, like, base level, do you think that it's possible that I'm a man? That's actually something they surveyed people about. I looked it up out of curiosity, and it was kind of what I expected, which is that 60% of people say that whether a person is a man or a woman is just based on their sex assigned at birth in the United States. And then even if you restrict that to younger people, so you say, okay, maybe older people don't get it, let's say people who are in their 20s. Well, among people in their 20s, that number is 50%. So half of people are sort of baseline pretty transphobic. And then, even if you restrict to Democrats, that number is 38%. And so I'm sure there are tons of people I interact with who hold those views. But it actually just doesn't come up a lot. For most people, they just don't spend much time thinking about trans people, which is actually a huge blessing. As sort of an analogy, think about something that you find a little weird, where you're like, I don't understand why that person would make that choice, that's kind of crazy. And so this is something I've worked on, right? Like, I want to spend as little time as possible judging people because I don't know anyone's life. And I don't know what makes people happy. I don't get it. There's no reason for me to judge. But if we were to give an example about something I've historically judged, I don't really get, like, religious fundamentalists of any religion. It just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not religious. I don't understand it. You know, people have a lot of very strict rules for living life, and sometimes I think, okay, wouldn't you be happier if you didn't have all those rules? It's something I think really passively, right? I think really passively, doesn't feel like that's a good idea. But I hardly ever think about it. You know, it's like, okay, a random TikTok will come up showing me some religious lifestyle, and I'll be like, that's kind of strange. And then I just move on with my day. I don't think about it at all. And then if I actually meet someone in real life who, you know, is really strictly adherent to their religion, I'll meet them and I'll be like, cool, that seems like that's working for you. I don't really get it, but you seem happy, and I just don't spend much time judging them, even if I don't understand it. And I think that's what most people's views about transness is. It's just something that's a little strange to them that they don't understand, but they just don't have the time and energy to, like, immensely debate it. I don't read up on religious fundamentalists and the history of it, and I don't watch YouTube videos about them. I just don't think about it very much. And again, I try broadly not to judge people in general, but, like, you know, just generically, groups that I judge passively, it's passive, right? To be successful, professionally, socially, people are trained to be conflict averse, right? You'll see these videos of, like, blah 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 debates transphobe, or like blah blah blah, you know, takes down, you know, trans SJW. Those sort of like attack videos where it's like really intense, and those get a lot of views. People like that actually are not well liked in the world. No one wants to hang out with like a crazy debater. They don't want to hang out with the transphobic side or the trans side, right? People who do well socially are charming and get everyone to like them, right? And the same is true professionally. You want to, you know, if you're a good salesperson, you can sell something to anyone. You know, I'm an academic, right? We have to sell ideas. A lot of our lives are about marketing and packaging, and we do not do well in the world if we are getting into random debates with strangers about things that are very personal to them. And so most people know how to keep those boundaries. And of course, you'll meet some people that don't, but those people often are not very successful and are not, like, you know, doing well at life. And so I have experienced transphobia, definitely, in ways that have been scary to me, and in ways that have been emotionally and literally, you know, consequential to me. But they have never been in sort of this facet of my life that is professional, sort of successful people. And that's not to say that I don't think I experienced passive transphobia or something like this, but people that are serious, successful academics, by and large, know how to keep it under wraps. And so, like, as an example of, like, a crazy comment that I got at one point, someone wrote on my YouTube channel, you're a woman. You act like it, look like it, sound like it. Girl, please. Right? I get that kind of comment all the time. No one has ever said anything like that, anything close to like that in my professional life. Among people that I interact with that are successful, we just never talk about my transness. I'm a PhD student, and I transitioned right before I started grad school. And I remember being so scared at the time about what people were going to think. So I came out to, you know, some of my professors out of necessity, right? Because I had to tell them I was changing my name and I was changing my gender. And then I think, you know, it's a handful of people, and then I think a handful of people could have figured out by context. And I remember really worrying what they would think of me. You know what's crazy? I don't know what they think about me. I have no idea. It has never come up. I was so worried about it. And maybe they think that, passively, that I'm still a woman. Maybe they think that it's a strange choice I made. Maybe they think any of those things. It's never come up. I think most likely they don't. But we just don't really address it. I was visiting these, you know, this same set of professors from my undergrad that had advised me, and I talked with them, and, you know, like, one person asked me how I was doing socially in grad school and whether it was hard being trans, and I was like, nope. Tied me to my transition. It's just, I'm any other guy, and most people met me as any other guy, and so it just doesn't come up, and he was happy to hear that, and we talked about what it's like being a man in economics, because I'm doing an economics PhD, and it's pretty male-heavy. And we talked about how to be a good ally for women. Another person mentioned that my voice was deeper, but that I was clearly the same person, which is true. And then some people were curious about why I chose the name Arthur, which is fair, because it's kind of a crazy choice. But, like, I never had an extended discussion with anyone about what gender means, or how sex and gender are different, and how medical transition works, and, you know, like, what steps and what, you know, it just doesn't come up. People do not care. And so, you know, that's actually kind of amazing, right? At the end of the day, these things are personal and are private, and we can exist in the world just not addressing personal and private things that maybe we agree to disagree about. And so that's how it works, right? Like, it would have totally shocked me. Like, what does it mean to agree to disagree about transes? It means we just don't talk about it. It just doesn't come up. And they just call me Arthur, go about life, and at the end of the day, calling me anything except Arthur and he creates so much more trouble for yourself, and so it's just not worth it for people. There's nothing anyone in the real world would ever get out of misgendering me and calling me a girl. You would be, like, creating that amount of conflict would have huge professional consequences for you. And that's just something I hadn't realized, is how, like, if you are someone that is hard to work with, no one wants to write a paper with you, no one wants to have you as an advisor, no one wants you around. Like, you have to actually be someone that's likable, and part of being likable is existing with people whose lifestyles you don't get, and whose identities you don't get, and just saying nothing about it. And so, I'm sure I interact with transphobic people all the time, but I just don't know because they don't tell me, because it would be inappropriate for them to be arguing about that. And similarly, people don't go on these rants about how much they support trans people to me. People don't talk about how it's amazing and I'm brave for being trans, and I don't even experience sort of like the, like, people offering unsolicited positive opinions about trans people. People just don't discuss trans people because it's weird to do that. And so I think the internet would have you believing that, like, every person gets surveyed at some point in their life about how much do you think trans people are valid and how much are they their real gender and whatever, and the reality is no one cares what anyone thinks about trans people. People just live their life, and some of them are trans, and it's, like, fine. And so, yeah, a lot of this is context. It is super important to me that people very close to me, like my family and my close friends and my partner, totally get my transness. And that's why some of those more heated discussions end up happening with people that are close to us. But it does not matter to me if, you know, the clerk, when I'm checking out what their opinions are about transness. It does not matter to me what my partner's second cousin's opinions are about transness. It does not matter to me, you know, what the random dude that I'm having a drink with at a party, what his opinions about transness are. It does not matter. It does not come up. And, you know, most people's exposure to trans people is so minor. Like, I remember I had this really sweet email from a relative when I came out, where he was like, yeah, I didn't understand the whole Caitlyn Jenner thing, I didn't get it, but, like, it really seems like you're doing something that's very brave and that will make you happy. And that's, like, the average person. They hold some sort of view where they're like, I just didn't get it, but it seems like you're doing something that you hope is going to work for you, and so I also hope it's going to work for you. And so those people, when they're contacted by, like, Pew or whatever, like, research, you know, surveys center, they'll say that, you know, something like, oh yeah, like, no, trans people, you can't become a man or a woman, you're just born that way. But then they meet you as a trans person, and they're willing to make exceptions and to learn. Most people just have such a limited knowledge of what transness is. And the other thing would have been surprising to me is how much, you know, changing those opinions is just about day-to-day interactions and not about a debate, right? Because you would think from all the sort of Ben Shapiro response videos and all that, like, the way that trans people are going to win is by having an argument that's going to, like, perfectly explain our existence, and that all of a sudden they're going to be like, oh my god, wait, trans people are right, they're actually men and women, and non-binary people are real, and actually the argument is convincing. I mean, no, it's not really about arguments at the end of the day. It's about, like, living life, succeeding, you know, standing up against adversity, and just, like, being happy, normal people, and then people meet us and are like, whoa, I didn't realize that trans people actually are happy, normal people that are just like me. And it's like that kind of slow change that happens over time, which is less glamorous and less clickable than sort of these response videos might, you know, lead you to believe. But it's what happens all the time. And I think about myself, right, like, I was not always the most educated person about trans issues. And there was a chunk of time where I remember vividly, I didn't understand why trans people medically transitioned. I didn't get it at all. I remember thinking I got, like, the social part. I was like, oh yeah, I get how you could feel like a man or feel like a woman, but if we're, like, you know, moving beyond expectations, like, why is it that you need to do things to your body to change your body? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. I didn't get it. And there was not one moment where all of a sudden someone laid out a set of arguments and I understood medical transition. Just slowly over time, I think through, you know, content I saw online and people you know, passively friends of friends, and I was like, oh, it seems like actually most trans people do like medically transition, so probably there's a reason. And eventually, you know, my opinion moved. But you can't, like, I can't pinpoint any one moment. And so a lot of people are in different stages of their journeys of understanding what transness is and how it works and all that. It turns out, again, it's quite easy to just interact with people with where they're at. Like, when I was at that stage when I didn't understand medical transition, I was not, like, unsolicitedly telling trans people that they shouldn't medically transition. I just personally didn't get it, and I kept that to myself. And to whatever extent I didn't, I was 16, so 16-year-olds have a lot less tact than adults do. But yeah, so, like, you'll meet people who don't get who don't get parts of you. They'll meet you, and maybe they'll learn you're trans, maybe they won't. A lot of time these days people don't initially know that I'm trans when they meet me. But I think the thing is when people do meet me and know that I'm trans, in the real world, it's pretty easy to see that it's working out for me. Like, I'm very happy, I'm in a career that I love, I have a great relationship with my parents, I have so many friends, I'm never lonely, I love my partner, I, like, am genuinely extremely happy. I have a great relationship to my body, like, things are working out for me, and it's pretty clear when you meet me in the real world that I'm a man and I'm a happy man. And so I think a lot of people, you know, have that kind of interaction, and at first, you know, they came in with somewhat transphobic views held passively. They meet me, they see clearly it's working out for me, clearly I'm a man, and then they think, okay, like, yeah, like, the trans movement's kind of crazy, but, like, Arthur's okay, and they make an exception for you. And it's easier to make that exception when you're sort of, like, a trans person that is less, you know, like, is more tolerable to transphobic people, right? So I won't try to claim that it isn't like, there are a lot of attributes about me that make it easier for people to make an exception for me. But often, you know, they'll make that exception, they'll think, okay, I don't understand the rest of it, but I do understand this one person. And then maybe if they were pressed, you know, maybe they would still be like, oh, yeah, well, Arthur's not, like, he's not technically a man, but, you know, it's too hard to think about. They just don't spend much time thinking about it, and the average person, the average one of my acquaintances, does not want to think about my genitals. They don't. And so, you know, they passively think of me a man, and then maybe if they were, like, pushing an argument, they'd be like, oh, it's not possible, but, like... And then eventually, over time, their opinion changes. Slowly, right? And slowly, and then they're like, oh, actually, that trans thing generally seems to work. Cool. And that's how that happens, right? You're someone's exception, and then slowly the exception becomes broader and broader, and then slowly their opinion changes. And so I think that the internet would lead you to think that the way that you're going to be able to manage transphobia as a trans person is by being very argumentative and trying to, like, sort of beat the transphobia out of every transphobic person. And I think in the real world, it's a few things. It's like being able to avoid the transphobia, like not end up in dangerous situations, not end up around bad people, shut down conversations that are leading to inappropriate places, and also, perhaps most importantly, making peace with the fact that many people won't get you. And that's a much bigger thing, right, than just transphobia. Like, many people won't get us on a deep level about many, many attributes. And our transness is one that feels very personal to us, but I think when we feel really confident in our gender, it just becomes less important that people understand that who don't really matter to me. Like, when I was early on in my transition, misgendering really hurt. But now, again, I get misgendered all the time in the YouTube comment section, and I just, like, whatever. I don't care. And then in real life, I know that, like, people, like, might hold certain views about my transness that aren't how I feel about it, and I just don't really care because I'm happy. Whatever. And this, you know, it reminds me of a conversation I was having with a friend more broadly about, like, what making peace with the fact people don't entirely get you looks like. Where it's like, even in the trans community, people won't entirely get your gender. I've had so many moments of going to trans events and feeling actually extremely disappointed by the fact that people did not get my gender experience. And so that could look like, you know, binary trans people that hold really, really, you know, intense hurt about their transness, and I don't really hold intense hurt about my transness. Or it can look like non-binary people that don't understand the fact I'm a man. Or it can look like really young trans people who are early in their transition, and now all of a sudden I feel like a trans elder, and that's really bizarre. It's so rare that people understand all of us, and our transness is such a complicated personal thing that it's rare that people get it, even within our own community. You know, you end up reaching this point of peace of being like, okay, actually, it only really matters to me that my close friends, and that my family, and my partner, it only matters a certain set of people that they get this about me. And for most people, it just won't come up. And that's what it is. And I also think it's kind of been cool to realize and reflect on this sort of, like, again, the passive transphobia, where people just hold slightly weird views about trans people, because I think it makes you realize how your impact as a trans person it can be what you make of it, and that just being out as a trans person can have huge consequences for, like, the way transphobia exists in society, because you slowly change people's opinions over time, and it's something I've watched happen, and something that is a change that, like, any of us are capable of achieving just by existing in the world, and just by, like, living our lives. And I'm really excited one day that I'm gonna be a professor, one day actually, increasingly soon, which is crazy, that I'm going to be a professor, and I'm going to be out about my transness. And I'm going to be serving on the LGBT committee within the economics profession, which is really exciting, and I'm going to be meeting with students who will know that I'm trans, and again, slowly changing people's impressions of what a trans person can look like. Like, a trans person can be an economist, and a trans person can be happy and healthy, and a really, you know, content man who lives a balanced life. And it's cool to just think that just by being me, and just by being public about, you know, who me is, who I am, that you can create that kind of change. Yeah, and so I guess I just wanted to talk about that, because I think that the internet can be a really scary place, and I want to make sure that, you know, people who are watching my channel have reasonable expectations about what sort of challenges you're going to be up against in life. And so it totally can be hard being a trans person, but it's not hard in the way that these sort of really cruel comments that get left in the YouTube comment section, and really intense videos that get pushed in your algorithm might make you think. It's hard in a more subtle way of just, like, living authentically and accepting that, you know, not everyone gets you. And then you have to realize that anything that's getting shared on the internet is a little bit salacious, at least. There's a selection into what's getting shared and what's getting pushed, and that includes my content too, right? And so you should, I think, always expect that everything is going to be a little less radical than you might think going into it, and that, you know, at the end of the day, our lives as trans people look pretty normal, and that normal is great.